The woman grabbed my arm in the parking lot of Harrison's hardware store. I'd never seen her before in my life. She was young, maybe 30, wearing scrubs under a worn jacket. Her eyes darted around like she expected someone to jump out from behind the pickup trucks. "Mr. Brennan?" she whispered. "Walter Brennan?" I nodded, too surprised to speak. She pressed a folded envelope into my palm. Her hands were shaking. "Your daughter is alive. She's not where they told you. Read this alone. Tell no one, especially not your son-in-law." Before I could ask a single question, she was gone, vanished between the rows of parked cars like smoke in the wind. I stood there for a full minute, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I drove home in a daze, nearly missed my turn twice. When I finally sat down at my kitchen table and opened it, the room started spinning. Inside was a photograph of my daughter Emily. She was sitting in what looked like a hospital bed, but something was wrong. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks were sunken. She looked like she'd aged 20 years. Clipped to the photo was a handwritten note. "Shady Pines Care Facility, Room 114. She asks for you every day. They keep her sedated. I'm so sorry I couldn't do more." My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Emily, my baby girl, the daughter I hadn't seen in 18 months because her husband Derek said she was at a specialized rehabilitation center in Switzerland. No visitors allowed. Limited contact. Doctor's orders. I'd believed every word. Let me go back to the beginning so you understand how a 71-year-old retired electrician from Amarillo, Texas, could be fooled so completely by his own son-in-law. My wife Barbara passed away 6 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought hard, but in the end, the disease was stronger. After she died, Emily became my whole world. She was our only child, born when Barbara and I had almost given up hope. Emily inherited her mother's gentle spirit and my stubborn streak. She became a kindergarten teacher, married her college sweetheart, and gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Lily, who's now 12, and Mason, who just turned 9. Emily's husband Derek seemed like a good man at first. He worked in financial consulting, wore expensive suits, and always brought wine to Sunday dinners. He had a way of talking that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. Barbara never quite warmed to him, said something about his smile didn't reach his eyes. I told her she was being paranoid. I should have listened to my wife. About 2 years after Barbara passed, things started changing. Derek got promoted, or so he said, started traveling more. Emily seemed tired all the time, withdrawn. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd paste on a smile and change the subject. The grandkids came over less. Family dinners became monthly instead of weekly. Then came the accident. 18 months ago, Derek called me at 6 in the morning. His voice was shaking. He said Emily had been in a terrible car crash. She'd hit a patch of black ice, lost control, wrapped her car around a telephone pole. She was alive, but barely. Traumatic brain injury, severe spinal damage. She'd been airlifted to a trauma center in Dallas. I drove 4 hours straight to that hospital. When I got there, Derek met me in the lobby. He looked exhausted, eyes red, tie loosened. He told me Emily was in surgery. It would be hours. He convinced me to go home, said he'd call with updates. I was so scared and confused. I did what he said. That was my first mistake. Over the next few weeks, Derek became the gatekeeper of all information about my daughter. He said she'd been transferred to a specialized neurological rehabilitation center. Not in Dallas, not in Texas, in Switzerland. Some cutting-edge facility that was her best chance at recovery. They have strict protocols, Derek explained during one of our phone calls. No visitors for the first 6 months. No phone calls that could overstimulate her damaged brain. The doctors say any emotional stress could set back her recovery by months. It sounded insane. It sounded cruel. But Derek had documents, official-looking letterheads from the Zurich Neurological Institute, progress reports signed by doctors with long European names. He even showed me a video of Emily in what looked like a high-tech hospital room, smiling weakly and saying, "I love you, Dad. I'm getting better. Please be patient." I watched that video 100 times. Something about it always felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The months crawled by. 6 months became 8. 8 became 12. Derek always had an excuse. Complications, setbacks, new treatments. I begged to fly to Switzerland. He said the doctors wouldn't allow it. I demanded to speak to Emily on the phone. He said the specialists forbade it. Meanwhile, I saw my grandchildren only when Derek allowed it, which wasn't often. He said the kids were struggling with their mother's absence and needed stability, not disruption. He enrolled them in a new school across town, hired a live-in nanny, built a wall between them and me, brick by brick, excuse by excuse. I'm ashamed to admit how long I accepted it. I'm ashamed of how thoroughly I was deceived. But I was a grieving old man who'd already lost his wife. The thought of losing my daughter, too, was unbearable. I clung to every scrap of hope Derek fed me, even when it stopped making sense. Then the woman in the parking lot changed everything. After I read that note and saw that photograph, I sat at my kitchen table until the sun went down. I couldn't move, couldn't think straight. Shady Pines Care Facility. I'd never heard of it. I opened my laptop and searched. It existed about 40 minutes outside Amarillo, a long-term care facility for patients with severe cognitive impairment. The website showed smiling nurses and sunny gardens, but something about those stock photos felt hollow. My daughter had been 40 minutes away this whole time. Not in Switzerland, not across an ocean, less than an hour from my front door. I wanted to drive there immediately, break down the doors, demand to see Emily. But the woman's warning echoed in my head. Tell no one, especially not your son-in-law. There was a reason she'd said that. I needed to be smart. The next morning, I called my old friend, Ray Hartwell. Ray and I had worked together at the power company for 30 years before we both retired. More importantly, Ray's daughter was a police detective in Lubbock. I trusted Ray with my life. I showed him everything. The photograph, the note, the 18 months of lies. Ray's face went pale as he listened. Walt, he said slowly, this sounds like what they call conservatorship fraud. There was a big case in California a few years back. People get legal control over someone, claim they're incapacitated, then drain their assets while keeping them locked away. My blood ran cold. Emily had a trust fund from Barbara's family, nearly $800,000, money that was supposed to go to her and the grandkids. Ray made some calls. His daughter Melissa agreed to help, quietly, off the books at first. She warned me that if Derek was involved in what we suspected, he might have connections. We needed to gather evidence before making any official moves. 3 days later, I drove to Shady Pines Care Facility. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street and watched. It was a squat, brown building surrounded by a chain-link fence. Nothing like the sunny gardens on the website. Staff members came and went. Delivery trucks pulled up to a back entrance. It looked more like a prison than a place of healing. I saw no patients outside. No visitors walking in. Just employees with badges and blank expressions. On my 4th day of surveillance, I spotted her. The woman from the parking lot. She walked out of a side entrance, got into an old Honda, and drove away. I followed her, keeping my distance like Melissa had taught me. She drove to a small apartment complex on the edge of town. I parked and waited until she went inside. Then I knocked on her door. The terror in her eyes when she saw me was immediate. "Mr. Brennan, you can't be here," she hissed. "I told you to tell no one." "I didn't," I said. "Please. I need to understand. I need to know what's happening to my daughter." Her name was Carmen Reyes. She'd been a nursing assistant at Shady Pines for 3 years. What she told me over weak coffee in her tiny kitchen made me want to put my fist through a wall. Emily wasn't in Switzerland. She'd never left Texas. After the accident, she'd spent 2 weeks in a Dallas hospital. She did have a brain injury, but it was moderate, not severe. She was expected to make a full recovery with proper rehabilitation. Instead, Derek had her transferred to Shady Pines. He'd obtained emergency conservatorship by claiming she was completely incapacitated. He'd presented forged medical documents to a judge in another county. Once he had legal control, he had her moved and sedated. "They keep her on a cocktail of medications," Carmen said, tears streaming down her face. Stuff that makes her confused, drowsy, unable to fight back. When she first arrived, she screamed for her father, for her children. They increased her dosage until she stopped. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. Why risk yourself? Carmen pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. A smiling young man with her eyes. My brother Marco. He was a delivery driver. 6 months ago, he stumbled onto something. Found documents at a facility like Shady Pines during a delivery, realized patients were being held against their will. He started asking questions, trying to help. She paused, and fresh tears fell. They found him in his apartment 2 weeks later. The police said it was a heart attack. He was 32 years old, Mr. Brennan. Perfectly healthy. No history of heart problems. My hands clenched into fists. Derek is part of something bigger, Carmen continued. There's a whole network. Doctors, lawyers, facility administrators. They target people with money and weak family connections. They file fraudulent conservatorships, get control of their assets, then lock them away where no one can find them. Your daughter's trust fund has probably already been drained. She showed me more. Hidden camera footage she'd secretly recorded inside Shady Pines. Emily in her room, staring at the wall. Emily trying to say my name but unable to form the words through the medication fog. Emily crying in her sleep. I've never felt rage like that in my life. Not when I found out Barbara's cancer had spread. Not when my father died. Nothing compared to seeing my daughter treated like a prisoner, like a piece of property. There's a doctor, Carmen said. Dr. Nathan Vance. He runs 3 facilities in the region. Derek is one of his partners. They've done this to dozens of families, maybe more. The ones who ask too many questions end up like my brother. I understood then why she'd risked everything to find me. She wanted justice for Marco, and I was going to make damn sure she got it. The next 2 months were the hardest of my life. Melissa Hartwell quietly opened an investigation. She connected with federal agents who'd been trying to build a case against Dr. Vance's network for years, but couldn't get enough evidence. Carmen became our inside source. Every day she went to work at that hellhole, knowing what they'd do if they caught her. She documented everything. Medication logs, financial records, conversations between staff members who thought no one was listening. She was the bravest person I've ever known. Meanwhile, I had to pretend everything was normal. I still had Sunday calls with Derek, still listened to his lies about Swiss specialists and promising treatments. Every word out of his mouth made me want to reach through the phone and strangle him, but I smiled. I nodded. I played the role of the foolish, trusting father-in-law. We gathered enough evidence to bring to a judge. Not just any judge, a federal judge in Houston who had no connection to Derek's network. Melissa and the FBI presented our case, and warrants were issued. The morning of the raid, I was there. I'd insisted, and no one could talk me out of it. We pulled up to Shady Pines at 6 a.m, a convoy of FBI vehicles and local police. The facility administrator tried to block the entrance. She was in handcuffs within 30 seconds. I ran down those hallways like I was 30 years old again, room 114. The door was locked. An agent kicked it open, and there was my daughter. Emily looked up at me with those hollow eyes, and for a terrible moment, I thought she didn't recognize me. The medication had done its work. My bright, beautiful girl had been turned into a ghost. Then, something flickered. A spark behind the fog. Daddy? I fell to my knees beside her bed and held her hand. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm taking you home. She started crying. So did I. So did half the FBI agents in that room. These hardened federal officers standing there with tears on their cheeks while a father and daughter reunited after 18 months of hell. Dr. Nathan Vance was arrested at his home that same morning. He was eating breakfast with his wife, not a care in the world, when they put him in handcuffs. 2 other doctors in his network were picked up in Houston and San Antonio. Administrators, nurses, and lawyers who'd been part of the scheme were rounded up over the following week. 15 victims were recovered from various facilities. 15 people who'd been erased from their lives, their assets stolen, their families told elaborate lies. Some had been imprisoned for years. One elderly woman had been declared dead by her own nephew, who'd inherited her estate and fled to Mexico. Derek tried to run. Of course he did. He cleaned out his bank accounts and headed for the airport, probably planning to disappear to some country without an extradition treaty. The FBI was waiting at the gate. They told me he actually cried when they put the cuffs on. Not tears of remorse. Tears of a coward who'd been caught. The trial took place 8 months later in federal court. I sat in that courtroom every single day, watched Derek try to blame everyone but himself, Watched Dr. Vance's lawyers argue their client was a respectable physician being persecuted. Watched them bring in character witnesses who talked about charity work and community involvement. None of it mattered. Carmen testified. Other nurses testified. Financial experts traced the stolen money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Former victims took the stand and described their nightmare in heartbreaking detail. My Emily testified too. By then, she'd been off the medications for months. Her mind was clear, her memory sharp. She looked Derek directly in the eyes and described what he'd done to her, how he'd isolated her even before the accident, how he'd controlled her access to money, to friends, to family, how he'd told her no one would believe her if she tried to escape. "I ask for my father every day," Emily said, her voice steady and strong. "I called out for my children until they drugged me into silence. The man I married did that to me. For money. For a trust fund that was meant to secure my children's future." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Derek received 35 years for fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. The conspiracy charge came from evidence linking him to Carmen's brother's death. They couldn't prove he'd pulled any triggers, but he'd been part of the planning. 35 years. He'll be nearly 80 before he's eligible for parole. Dr. Nathan Vance got life without parole. He was the mastermind. The evidence showed he'd been running variations of this scheme for over a decade. At least 3 deaths were directly connected to his organization. The judge called him a predator who'd exploited the most vulnerable members of society. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years depending on their involvement. Every single one of them was convicted. Every single one. After the verdict, I found Carmen in the courthouse hallway. She was standing by a window, looking out at the parking lot, her expression unreadable. "We got them," I said. "Marco got justice." She nodded slowly. "It doesn't bring him back, but it means something. It has to mean something." I handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $200,000. Part of the settlement from the lawsuit we'd filed against the facilities involved. I'd made sure Carmen and Marco's mother received a substantial portion. It was the least I could do for the woman who'd risked everything to save my daughter. Carmen tried to refuse. I wouldn't let her. "Your brother was a hero," I told her. "He saw something wrong and tried to fix it. That's rare in this world. This money won't replace him, but it'll help your mother. It'll help you build something good. Marco would have wanted that." She hugged me then. This young woman I'd known for less than a year, but who'd become family in every way that mattered. The recovery wasn't easy. Nothing about this was easy. Emily spent 3 months in a legitimate rehabilitation facility, undoing the damage those medications had done to her body and mind. Some days were better than others. Some nights she woke up screaming, convinced she was back in that room. But slowly, steadily, she came back to us. The hardest part was explaining everything to Lily and Mason. They'd spent 18 months being told their mother was sick, far away, couldn't see them. Derek had poisoned them against me, said I was too old and confused to be trusted. Undoing that damage took time and patience and more therapy sessions than I can count. But children are resilient, more resilient than we give them credit for. Within 6 months, we had something resembling a normal life. Emily and the kids moved into my house while she got back on her feet. The breakfast table that had been empty for years was suddenly full of noise and laughter and spilled orange juice. Last month, we celebrated Emily's recovery with a barbecue in my backyard. Ray and his wife came. Melissa brought her family. Carmen was there with her mother. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years showed up with casseroles and good wishes. At one point, I found myself standing apart from the crowd, watching my family. Emily was chasing Mason around the yard. Lily was showing Carmen's mother pictures on her phone. The sun was setting over the Texas flatlands, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Barbara would have loved this. She would have been right in the middle of it, organizing games, making sure everyone had enough to eat. I could almost see her there, smiling that smile that always made everything better. I'd been fooled. Badly. For 18 months, a man I'd trusted had kept my daughter prisoner and lied to my face. He'd nearly gotten away with it. If Carmen hadn't found the courage to approach me in that parking lot, if she hadn't risked her own life to expose the truth, I might have died believing Emily was in Switzerland. I might have died never knowing. That's the lesson I want to share. The reason I'm telling this story. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Derek's lies always had a thin veneer of plausibility, but deep down, in that place where logic meets gut feeling, I knew. I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't want to believe it. Don't let anyone become the gatekeeper to your family. If someone is controlling all access to a loved one, if they're always the middleman, always the one with excuses, pay attention. Isolation is the first step toward control. And most importantly, never stop fighting. I'm 71 years old. I've got bad knees and worse hearing. But when my daughter needed me, I found strength I didn't know I had. Age is just a number. Love is what matters. Love is what saved Emily. Love is what brought those criminals to justice. I look at my grandchildren now, and I see the future. Lily wants to be a lawyer, says she wants to help people who can't help themselves. Mason hasn't decided yet, changes his mind every week between firefighter and astronaut. Emily is back to teaching, part-time for now, working with kids who need extra help. We're okay, more than okay. We're a family again. If you're watching this and something in your life feels wrong, if someone you love seems to have disappeared behind a wall of excuses and restrictions, don't ignore it. Don't be polite. Don't wait, dig deeper. Ask harder questions. Find the people who will help you uncover the truth. Because the truth is always there, waiting to be found. Sometimes it takes a stranger with a note in a parking lot. Sometimes it takes a broken brother's sacrifice. Sometimes it takes an old man who refuses to give up on his daughter. But it's always there, and it's always worth fighting for.